Hey guys, we want to welcome you to the 1043 podcast. It is our first podcast. Um, and today we're going to touch a subject that's been going around the news on social media. I've had quite a few debates on Facebook. We want to talk about ICE. The reason why we want to talk about them, and most people are asking, why are you defending these quote unquote monsters? Well, it's plain and simple. We're going to cover the training qualifications and comparisons to other agencies, local and state, specifically here in Texas, of what they go through. Now, we can't get into specifics of the classes because we don't have experience in it. It's just the um, research I've done on the ICE website. So we're going to kind of cover the basics of what they do. And then my husband is going to go through what Texas goes through to become a law enforcement officer.
When we talk about training, what caught my attention is you hear a lot of folks on TV, and you can go back the past 10 or 15 years when you talk about investigations from the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, defund police. The ICE is just the newest form of this. And the refrain has always been cops need more training. Well, they never talk about how cops are actually trained. They never address it. And my guess is most of them don't have a freaking clue how cops are trained. If you talk about what they already go through, then maybe we can talk about deficiencies. But we don't even talk about the basics. Let's start with where do cops start from? How are they recruited? What do they go through before they ever go to the street? Because every police officer in this country, regardless of agency, has to go through some sort of basic peace officer training. That's your federal officers, state, local, doesn't matter. Even constables have to have basic peace officer training.
Right. ICE, they do about 40 hours a week. They go through a 22 to 24-week class. That's about 800 hours of training. And that's before he even puts a badge on, before he takes the oath, and before he gets out on the streets. That is just straight training. They have to be 21 years of age. That's to become any law enforcement officer. You go through an extensive background check, a polygraph, physical and mental evaluations. You do have to have a bachelor's degree or specific training in order to go through a basic level to become an ICE officer. You have to be under the age of 37. You can't be over the age of 37. You have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to have lived in the States for 3 years. That's a minimum. That license, you have to pass an oral board. So you go in front of these people that you do not know. And this is all before you even go to class. And you have to be able to have the ability to carry a firearm. So if you can't carry a firearm or you can't meet any of those eligibilities, you don't get passed. In Texas, my husband's going to explain that one to you.
So in Texas, you have to be a resident of Texas. You have to have 21. You have to be 21 years of age. If there's no statute cap on age, certain agencies will say you can't be in 37, 35 years old. Tends to kind of be the norm. You go and you apply to an agency. And Texas is kind of unique in that you don't have to hire on with an agency. You can go to a community, usually it's a community college. Some 4-year universities have police officer training, but they're still going to make sure you're 21 years of age, you have a valid Texas driver's license, you've graduated high school, um, you can clear a background check. Some agencies use the polygraph, but it's not a mandate. Um, typically there's some sort of mental and physical evaluation. Again, if you're going to a larger city, county, state agency, you're going to have a mental and physical evaluation. If you're going to a community college training, typically they don't have those, although they do have to certify you're mentally capable of being a police officer. Um, Generally, your better trained, better paid tends to be bigger agencies, especially in Texas. Certainly, you don't have to have a college degree, but often it makes you more competitive. Uh, you look at a lot of agencies; they'll say you have to have 2 years, 60 hours of college, and you have to either that or 2 years full time military service. That's not a state requirement. That's just what you need just to turn your application in. So when we talk about, you had mentioned the federal officers, you mentioned all those requirements. You have to meet all those requirements before they'll even look at your application,
Right.
right? That's before you ever even get through the door and start training.
Right. Now, saying that these officers, these federal agents, have to go through all of this, they have to go through the training, they have to graduate. I don't understand how people can still sit there and say that they're not law enforcement. And you made a valid point. This has been going on since BLM and Me Too, and I still can't wrap my head around libtards going, well, they're not real officers. They go through the same exact training as local and state officers do in all 50 states. And
Yeah.
in fact, they go through more than what a normal officer would go through.
And generally, if you're applying to any federal level agency, U.S. Marshals, FBI, DEA, I think there's
Right.
23 different federal law enforcement agencies that have special agent investigator positions, including Air Force OSI, Navy NCIS, if you watch the television show, Army CID. Generally, because the feds pay better, they can be more selective in who they choose.
Right.
Some agencies outright require you to have a bachelor's degree before they'll even look at it. Others, they may take equivalent training and experience, uh, but pretty much assume you have to have a bachelor's degree to get hired if you want to be competitive. And
Right.
and like I said, a lot of that has to do with pay. And you can look at the individual states too. Your state police, because they tend to pay more than most local and county agencies, they can be more selective. So just because we talk about minimum requirements doesn't mean you're not still having to have more qualifications to be competitive. Because if they've got 30 slots in a training academy and they've got say 70 applicants who can pass the, okay, you're 21, you have a valid driver's license, you don't have any criminal conviction on your record above just like a traffic ticket type thing. The one exception to that is family violence, and that comes under federal law. You can run a basic obstacle course, you can, pass a polygraph. uh, if they got 70 applicants and everybody meets all those requirements, well, what makes you distinctive? Okay, do you have some sort of military record that might make you more competitive? Do you have education that might make you more competitive? Do you have previous work experience, right? So if you worked in a prison from 18 to 21, well, you're already used to dealing with a population you're going to be dealing with on the street as a police officer, right?
Right.
That's obvious relevant
Right.
experience.
I just don't get how libtards can go, well, they're not real law enforcement.
I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to nullify ICE's operations. I think what they're trying to say is if we can convince the public, if we can convince people they're not actually cops, then we can nullify every effort they have, right? We can turn around and say, no, 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 they're not supposed to be doing that because they don't have a cop. Being a police officer means you have special responsibilities and you have special powers, namely arrest. If you look at Texas, there's honestly, when you start talking about things like self defense and responsibility and things like that, There's not much distinction between your average citizen and a police officer, other than the training and experience. Um, but you can't tell me we're not trying to professionalize police officers. There's 4 year, 2 and 4 year universities across the country that have criminal justice degrees. That is effectively a sociology degree with special emphasis on the criminal justice system. I'm willing to bet that a lot of your ICE officers have criminal justice. Now, other agencies like say the FBI, they're notorious for wanting lawyers and accountants. They want other professions. Basically, they want professional training degrees, right? CPAs,
Right.
engineers, and a lot of it is they're very specialized investigators. ICE, from what I can tell, and I've never worked at the federal level, they're a lot of them are uniform. You'll see some civilian investigators, but you see civilian in local and state. You see them wear civilian clothes as investigators, and we can get off into why a lot of that has to do with interview and interrogation. Why the plain clothes gives the officer an advantage over somebody in a uniform. Uh, but generally, you're wearing that uniform, and ICE appears to be mostly a uniform service. You're wearing that to be very distinctive, to stand out, to look the part.
Right. I know that state and local have continuous training, and I know probably ICE has continuous training throughout their whole entire careers. It doesn't stop after they graduate the academy.
Yeah, every law enforcement agency, again, you can come across the state, you can look at different local. You'll see some variation in that continuous training. ICE is a specialized agency in that they were created and they work within a set of laws. They're the same federal agent as any other agency, but they're trained specialists to do immigration law. But when we talk about the basic training, we're talking about, hey, you've got a temporary employee contract. We're going to send you through the academy to not only train you, but evaluate your ability to be a police officer. And that's a big part of the hiring process is the basic training. Is looking to see, do you have, can you handle the stress? Can you master the skills and knowledge base needed to do it? With ICE officers, they're working primarily within the immigration codes
Right.
of federal law. But you can turn around and look at say the state of Texas. Well, the game warden, the Texas Ranger, and the constable all go through the same 720-hour basic training, but the game warden will go on to specialized training because they're working in a very specialized set of laws, the Fish and Wildlife Code. Texas Rangers start out as DPS troopers, so they really know the traffic code. And once they make Ranger, they get sent to special investigator training. The constable gets a lot of civil service continuing education because that tends to be what they focus on is the civil codes. Um, Within larger agencies like big city agencies, you will have homicide investigators. Well, death investigation is a very specialized training. Internet ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, is a very specialized investigation. Human trafficking, child abuse, these are all specialties. Drugs ends up being a specialty, and within those kind of overarching umbrellas, you can have people that kind of focus on very specific aspects of each one of those.
What we keep hearing, and especially everybody keeps hearing on the news, is like we just talked about, was they need more training. Well, then explain what kind of training, because they go through de escalation, which is sensitivity. It's to de escalate a situation that they're in, especially these guys on the streets. And then you've got these rioters that are in their faces and they're throwing stuff and they've got mob mentality and they're getting death threats. You have people showing up with weapons who come out for intent to harm. Um, Explain to us what what more training do you want these guys to have? Because they go through so much to begin with before they ever become an officer. So I guess I'm not putting two and two together when these libtards are going, well, they need more training.
Well, a lot of it comes down to let's use Texas, right? So Texas has a minimum basic 720-hour school. Whether you are a brand new trooper hiree or you go to a big city and you're a police recruit, or you go to the community college. Texas has an overarching agency called TCOL, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, that kind of says you have to have this many 720 hours, but within that, and I forget the exact breakdown, but you're going to do, say, 40 hours in criminal investigations. You're going to do probably 80 hours in criminal law and civil procedure. You're going to do probably 80 hours in firearms training, another probably 80, 40 in less lethal, right? Think your baton, your taser, all the less lethal things. They're going to learn actual physical hands uh, defensive tactics. They're gonna. I mean, they even go as far as this is how you put handcuffs on properly, right? You don't slap them on like they do on the silly TV dramas. Um, so to say they need training, okay, that's fine. We're going to get down into if you're talking about de-escalation, right? You talk a lot about mental illness. You talk a lot about substance abuse. Um, but in the end, a lot of that they can't teach you is the person they're dealing with, they get a vote. And I think that's what the libtards gloss over or may just not understand is we can teach all these different subjects of going in a basic school, right?
Right.
But in the end, every person you're dealing with has a vote in how that encounter goes, right? So if you go to, let's say you make a traffic stop and they have a traffic warrant and you've got to arrest them, you ask them to step out of the car, they step out, put your hands behind your back, the officer puts the handcuffs on. That encounter is going very smoothly because that person is choosing and here's the deal. That warrant may be wrong, right? They may not have deserved that. They may not get proven in court, but that's what court's for. But in the end, that person is dictating how that encounter goes. Same scenario in a traffic stop, and the subject starts calling the officer everything but a child of God and rolling up the window, and I love sovereign citizens, rolling up the window and putting the driver's license up against the window and all the stupid shit people do just to make the cops' job harder. Um, you're dictating to that officer. Now, what little magical, sweet little words are you going to say to de escalate that? The subject is dictating how that goes, and that applies to ICE too, right? They show up at a subject's house they're got a deportation order on. They knock on the door, and that person answers the door, and the officer says, "Hey, are you such and such?" And yeah, okay, turn around, put your hands. Guess what? That officer is going to put the handcuffs on, walk them out to the car, drive them down to the detention facility, do the paperwork, and go about his day, right? If the subject decides to fight, they decide to run. And I love this. Oh my God, ICE arrested a 5-year-old. Yeah, because their shithead father left him standing there by himself.
And the mother didn't want to take him.
And the mother didn't want him. Well, guess what? Mom and dad dictated how that encounter went. What do you think? Will we even know that person existed? Had they just went, okay, I'll go to jail and I'll fight this in court?
Yeah, we wouldn't have heard about the 5-year-old.
Yeah, we wouldn't have known anything about it. So when we talk about training, yeah, it's easy to blame the cop, and kicking the cop seems to be a national pastime for the past 15 freaking years. But what are we really talking about? What are we, what training? What magical little words? What is it you, as your super liberal socialist self, What magic little words do you think you can say to make every encounter go smooth?
Especially what's happening in Minneapolis right now with the rioters. And I don't call them peaceful protesters. They're rioters. They're out there blowing whistles and they're throwing stuff. And like I said, they're coming out there. They're angry mobs of people taking videos of them so that they can become social media heroes. And then you've also got whistles going off for hours. So imagine you're watching TV, you're watching it live. I know for me, in the first 5 seconds, if that's going on, I'm muting it. But those officers can't mute that. And they're dealing with that. And they're trying to de escalate the situation. And they don't have, especially in Minneapolis, they don't have the backing of local or state to keep the mob away like they do in other red states. Because you don't hear anything about New Orleans. You don't hear anything about Texas. You don't hear anything about Alabama or Louisiana or anywhere else because they're actually working together to do the job. So then you have to deal with, on top of that, the illegals, like you said, who don't want to cooperate and they're resisting and they're running. You've got all this stuff going on. How do you want them to de escalate that situation? I blame Frey and Walls and um, Ellison for going on TV and putting the fire to the people. And I tell you what, they don't care if you get arrested or shot because they made the 5 o'clock news because some poor sap went out there with a gun and decided to go up against an ICE agent. And guess what? You're unalived. That lead dispenser is not going to save you. The best thing to do is just do your little protest on the other side of the sidewalk, yell, scream, whatever you want to do, let the officer do his job, and everybody goes home.
Fight it in court.
Yeah.
That's what the court's for.
Yeah.
Because all officers are human and they make mistakes. That's what the court's for. And I want to circle back for a second. You talked about the whistling, and I want y'all to think about, pull up a podcast or a news blip that shows those officers, that shows those on the street. Listen to that audio where they're screaming and blowing those whistles, because I bet you last about 3 to 5 seconds before you're ready to turn that off. Now imagine listening to that for hours, right? Everywhere you go, you're hearing the screaming, you're hearing the whistles. You as a human being listening to that all day.
Yeah.
Right? Just that cacophony of noise.
It throws them off, I imagine, because they're trying to focus on a job at hand, and you've got this mob mentality with whistles and yelling and calling them everything under the sun. But like you said, a child of God. These guys already go through riot and protest training. They go through de-escalation training. But when you're in that situation with that angry mob for hours on end, it could be 20 people, it could be 2,000 people. Because we've all seen it on TV. Every news station you turn on, it's Minneapolis.
Well, we started this about training, so let's kind of focus on that the Minneapolis stuff's the end result,
right,
of those officers, and understand some of those officers probably are brand new, fresh out of the academy, and others may be experienced officers, right? Even one of the directors had talked about they're having to rotate those people in and out, rotate the officers in and out to give them a break. But let's start at the beginning, right? If this is about officer training, let's start at the beginning. We talked about their requirements. So what is it they actually go through? And we'll use Texas mainly as the example, but that's really kind of the industry standard, right? So New York may require a little different subject, different hours. California may require a different subject and hours from Texas and New York. The feds, even within from one agency to another, because remember what I said, there's like 23 separate federal law enforcement agencies. Even within them, they may all go to the same 80-hour basic criminal investigator course, but all the other training may be different. So you get hired on, you typically get an employment contract. And it says, hey, you're going to go through training, we're going to evaluate you. You have no guarantee of a job. Even if you passed everything, a lot of places you have no guarantee of a job. Because they're taking a look at you and they may see something that just doesn't look right, or maybe you can't handle pressure, maybe you freeze up. And some of the training is stress inoculation, right? The military does that. If you've ever been through basic training, the whole point of yelling and screaming at you is stress inoculation. It's to get you to work under stressful situations so that you learn how to work under stressful situations. And a lot of your basic police officer academies are set up on the military basic training model of maybe you may have two instructors. One's kind of nicer, and there's a standard. They're going to make sure you meet the standard, and the other one may be a jackass. But it's all done by design. It's all done for a reason. So you get hired on. You go to a basic academy, right? In Texas, it's 720 hours. You typically start with a history of TCOL, kind of history of law enforcement. Where did we come from? How did we get here? You don't spend a whole lot on it. You'll do report writing. You'll do mandatory, what are your professional requirements? What training do you have to have even after you finish this big, long 6 to 8 month long school that you're about to go through? How to do the uniform, department of policies. If you're going through a specific department, they're going to spend time on their own department policies also. You're going to do physical fitness education. Most training academies, you're going to spend either the first hour of your day or the last hour of your day doing exercises, right? They're teaching you how to work out. They're trying to make exercise a norm. Now, it's kind of off topic. There's a reason why officers typically don't follow through on that, but they're trying to teach you that. They're going to do criminal investigations. You're going to spend probably 1 week doing nothing but reading law. You'll spend the next week doing nothing but reading civil or code of criminal procedure, which is essentially how do you do stuff? What are the requirements for a warrant? When can you enter a house? When can you enter a car? What's the plain view doctrine? All these different little legal concepts that you're going to need as a police officer to operate. And we can soon assume the feds do something very, very similar to this. You're going to spend, say, 40 hours on firearms just in classroom and use of force. When do you use force? How do you use it? What are the different levels of use of force? You may spend a week or two out actually shooting. Then you're going to spend a few days learning to use the baton, the pepper spray, the taser. And most academies, if you carry a taser, you've been shot by it. That's just a whole different level of fun. You're going to learn alcohol and beverage code. You're going to learn family violence. There's requirements. If you go to a family violence call in Texas, if you have reason, it says you shall make arrest. There's most laws have discretion. Texas says, family violence, you shall make an arrest. Well, guess what? If the officer doesn't, he's breaking the law, right? So he better know that. He better learn that in the basic school. I don't know if the federal level has certain you shall requirements for arrests or not arrests. But I'm pretty sure if they do, the ICE agent or any other federal trainee, they're going to get taught that. It's going to get drilled into their head. They're going to learn how to drive a vehicle, operate a vehicle under emergency situations, how to push it a little bit. Now, in Texas, that's not such a big deal because we do 88 miles an hour up the freeway interstate anyway, because if you don't, you get run over. But if you've never done it, we'll teach you how. So the feds have a really cool vehicle operation course in which they go out and spin cars and do all kinds of stuff. So you're going to go through all this different stuff, types of training. You're going to go through mental health training. You're going to go through de-escalation. How can I speak? And it used to be, what they called verbal judo. They probably call it something now. It was based on a book, um, in which it talks about tone of voice. It talks about how to kind of change the words, how to buy time, how to keep talking so you don't have to use force. But one of the things, especially where we're talking about what you see, use of force makes great visuals on television. One of the things they don't talk about is no use of force looks good on television, even if it's legitimate. And the person you're dealing with, they get a vote in that. The old saying, and I forget who it's attributed to. I should probably look it up, but I'm not that motivated. The enemy gets a vote. Well, as a citizen, you're trying to make an arrest. You're not an enemy, but you get a vote in that situation, right? You can choose, kind of like we were talking about the car. You can choose to submit and fight it in court with lawyers, which is what you should do, or you can choose to physically fight and run and resist and do all these other things. And I'm not even talking about deadly force. I'm just talking about what every cop deals with every day they go to work. And the basic academy is supposed to give you some level to train that. After you graduate the basic academy, typical there's a 6 month to a year long evaluation period in which that basic recruit is assigned to a senior officer. Think of it kind of like a paid internship. You're being paid maybe a little less than that officer, but you're learning how do you take all of this stuff and put it together. So if you're covering all these subjects in the basic school, and you can't cover everything, we can't afford to have a person, in school forever to learn everything about everything, and nobody knows everything about everything, right? You got to draw a line somewhere in which say, okay, you've got enough to function at a level in the street, and federal law enforcement through FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, has that. They take them and they send them out, and I'm sure they pair them with senior officers. It's called field training. There's a great police drama I absolutely love called The Rookie. That really caught that in the first few seasons of you come out of the basic academy, what it's like to be an officer, learning how to be a cop by other cops.
I know in Texas, y'all do the culture diversity training. And I'm sure there's some form of ICE um, class similar to it, or if not, they may call it something else. Um, I don't understand, I guess, because woke is dead, and it seems like culture diversity training is a waste of time.
Cultural diversity training has been in Texas mandated training for at least the last 25 years, more than that, actually. It probably goes back to the late 80s, early 90s, in which you get it in the basic school, the basic police officer, which I talked about. But Texas has multiple levels of police officer. There's basic, intermediate, advanced, and master. So you have to take cultural diversity once every 2 years until you reach the intermediate license. And it's if you've gone to public high school, you've gotten more cultural diversity training than you ever get in this 40-hour school of, well, if these people do this, and it's great. I freaking love it because it's don't be racist because not every individual meets the cliche, but we're going to talk about cliche stuff people do so you as a now non-racist cop can interact with it. It's awesome. If you can get a copy of T. Cole's manual for cultural diversity, read it. It is and see it for the contradiction that it is. At the very second, it's like I say, don't be racist. Don't assume everybody acts like this. But if people act like this is how you handle it.
Well, and you hear these libtards, and we've kind of covered it a little bit. And I think it's to shy away from what ICE is actually doing, and especially on my social media. If they're not real cops, which they are, and they do all this mandatory training before they even go out into the field, how can you see ICE as not federal law enforcement? They're enforcing immigration law, which has been on the books for centuries. It's been on, well, for decades. It's been on the books.
Well, break it down, right? So people want to say, "Oh, they're not really cops. They can't actually do that." Those are idiots trying to nullify what they're doing to make them go away.
They're
It's
internet
whole,
cops.
yeah. It's crossing your fingers and stomping your feet. I don't wanna. I don't wanna. But take a look. They have to have basic training.
Right.
They have to meet the federal recurring officer training. They're issued. If you look at the tool belts when they're in uniform, it's almost exactly the same as their state and local counterparts. Their hours of training, the subjects they have to go through, where I talked about Texas, is going to be very, very similar to that kind of breakdown. You'll see some variation from one subject to the next, but you see that everywhere. Um, they're empowered with the authority to arrest, right? If they can say they have probable cause, and I would think a deportation order from a judge constitutes probable cause, they have the power to detain, transport, and bring before the courts. Well, if that's not a police officer, if that's not the same thing as every other federal agent, state, and local, then what are you really saying, right? How are they actually different? Because you're going to have to name some specifics. They have a uniform that looks like police, but so does the Walmart security guard. Um,
They
they
have a
have, but they have
badge.
they have a badge. So do firemen. Uh,
Well, firemen are special.
sure, not the way I use the word special, but they're special. Um, but what differentiates, say, the ICE officer from the security guard and the fireman is the power to arrest based on probable cause, and that's pretty much what the state gives every law enforcement officer that exists in the U.S. is the power to arrest based on probable cause.
Well, the libtards need to get on board because, I mean, this whole debacle of let's defund, because that's regurgitating from several 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago of defund the cops. It's the same talking points that the liberal heads are saying. And I think it's to get your attention away from what's actually happening, which is cleaning up the streets. They're going through the training. They're doing everything that any other law enforcement officer has to do in the country.
Yeah, and then that's been my point talking about all the basic
Right.
training and the reoccurring is if you're doing all this stuff and we have these laws on the books.
Yeah.
And my question is if the federal law is racist when a Republican president decides to enforce the law, why wasn't it racist when say a Democrat president or previous federal Republican presidents enforced the law? Why wasn't it racist when the majority of House congressmen and senators voted that law into existence? Right? So you want to tell me that law's racist and I shouldn't be enforcing it? My first question is great. How many letters did you write? How many freaking phone calls did you make to your federal representatives to have that law changed? How many times have you done that? How far back can you go with that? Because if it's racist now that it's being enforced, why wasn't it racist back then?
Or if you think training needs to be reevaluated, why aren't you contacting your federal representatives going, hey, I think ICE needs
Well, in that case,
training?
Yeah, in that case, you can actually, I would say, contact that department head. Hey, your officers need to do X, Y, and Z. That's no different than you thinking the deputies at your local sheriff's department or your local constable's office are rude and they shouldn't be treating you that way. Well, you're going to pick up the phone, you're going to call that police chief, you're going to call that sheriff, you're going to call that constable, and you're going to say your officers are doing X, and and you want them to do Y. Well, have you done that with the federal? Have you tried? If you hadn't tried, why not? Right? If you're going to turn around and say they're racist or they don't know what they're doing, you need to figure out what their training is, where their deficiency is. You need to get a hold of that department head and explain to them, because you obviously know better than all the cops who do the job how to do it correctly.
Or my favorite is, well, they shouldn't use lethal force. Well, my argument to that is, don't use a weapon at a quote unquote peaceful protest and not expect them for their training to kick in to be able to protect themselves or somebody else.
Well, let me ask you this. What use of force have you gotten? As an individual, ask yourself, what use of force have you gotten? Do concealed carry is all over the country,
Right.
right? Different states have different variations of it, but do you carry a pistol? Are you willing to use it? Right? If somebody is attacking your family member, if they're hurting your family member, are you going to use force up to deadly force? So here's the question. If you're allowed to protect your life or you're allowed to protect somebody else's, why is that cop different? Do you expect them to get hurt? Do you expect them to die in the name of the law? Every cop I know is willing to take a risk. They're willing to put their life on the line, and part of the training we talked about
Right.
is
Is
how to
doing that.
how to mitigate that risk.
Right.
But in the end, it's still risk. And if you're going to tell that officer he can't use deadly force, you better goddamn well explain what do you expect him to do and how would you do differently.
I think what they want to see is them take a bullet.
I think what they want is the soundbite. I don't even think they
Yeah.
want to see a bullet. I don't think they really have thought it. This Most of what I see is nothing below a surface area examination. Kicking the cop is a national freaking pastime. So let I get my little bit in because I need that on my social media site.
You want to be a social media
And you're
hero.
too chicken shit to sign up. Hey, I got an idea. If you're such a freaking genius, why don't you go become a freaking cop and teach everybody how to do it? Because you obviously know better.
Well, some places have the civilian auxiliary where you actually go to a class, 40-hour class, where you actually get to learn, not actually shoot or arrest anybody, but you get to see behind the scenes of what those officers go through and the training they've gone through. Now, you're not going to get the exact training, obviously, for auxiliary, because you're not going to be a peace officer, but you get behind the scenes. So instead of sitting here bitching about how they don't have training, call your local agencies and see if they have a civilian auxiliary class that you can go be a part of.
They're also known as Citizens Academies.
Right. So be a part of the solution, not part of the problem, and stop bitching about how these guys don't have training or they need more training, because you don't do that to your local cop or to your state cop when they pull you over or they come arrest you because you've committed a crime, but you're going to do it to an ICE agent enforcing a law. It's the same principle. Every single officer in the United States, whether they're federal, state, local, they all get the same training. It may be different. It may be more extensive. It just depends.
Well, and
I like your idea. If you think you can do the job better, then go be a freaking cop.
Show them how it's done.
Yeah.
Right? If you can build the better mousetrap, by God, build it.
Without lethal force.
Yeah. So, and then, we've talked about just the basic. That's just gets them out the academy door. We haven't even talked about reoccurring training. Because I don't know what the federal requirement is, but I guarantee they have so many hours of training they have to do every year. Texas, you have to do 80 hours every 2 years because Texas is on a 2-year cycle. But it still works out. You're doing about 40 hours each year. You're taking 1 week of your paid time. Your agency loses you doing whatever it is, whether you're on patrol, whether you're an investigator, whatever it is, you have to go get this reoccurring training. And they make training mandates. So in the last 2-year cycle, Texas being the geniuses that they are, and I freaking love this, you had 8 hours of wellness training on top of the cultural diversity. Wellness training where I shit you not, you sat at a computer and you had to learn about freaking meditation. I'm not kidding. I'm not clever enough. I can't make this up.
How to meditate.
How to meditate. How self-care.
Must have been a liberal that designed that
I don't
class.
know who put that crap in, but I swear to God, if you go to TCOL, you'll
Did you
see
learn
the
how to
list.
meditate?
Do I strike you as the meditation
No.
type? Like, I don't know a cop in the country that has time to meditate. In fact, what do you think would happen? Imagine you're a patrol officer and you're a sergeant, and you pull up, and your patrolman is sitting in his car with his eyes closed, head back. He's got his little scented candle, maybe some, a dream catcher hanging from the rear view mirror. He's got his fingers rounded up, and he's saying Om over and over again.
Listening to Enya.
Oh my God. But Sarge, it's wellness training and self-care.
I wasn't sleeping.
I wasn't sleeping. Never mind, it's 3 a.m. on the night shift. I was not, and I got an extra job.
I had to do my 1 hour self meditation.
Because Tico taught me to.
Well, that's like, they have to, and I don't know about ICE, but recertification on the service weapons are mandatory.
Yeah.
At least in Texas. I don't know about
federal agents do.
but,
Federal agents actually have recertification
so
courses.
you have to recertify on your...
Usually at minimum once a year.
On your service weapon. That's more training. So that's training upon training upon training that all these men and women go through. It's not chosen. It's not, oh, well, we don't want to. It has to be done. And I guess that's my point is these people go through continuous training from the time they hit academy to the time they retire. They are continuously doing training.
Well, and that's just all we've talked about up to this point is the mandated reoccurring basic
that's
stuff.
That's not if you want to, take an extra class because you want to learn something.
Well, and if you're a specialist, right? If you're a death investigator, if you're in the ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, or you're a child abuse investigator, those are gangs, drugs. Those are all very specialized, and they have a bunch of different SWAT is another one that has a bunch of different specialization schools within that those guys have to go through. Those men and women have to go through to be better at that particular field, and they're doing that in addition to the mandated reoccurring training. So they're saying Om while they're learning how to make drug busts. Picture this: SWAT officer all tacked out, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his fingers saying Om. And
got his earbuds in, listening to Enya.
Yeah. It's self-care.
Got to schedule that in.
So, yeah, So you go through all this, and like I say, we're using Texas and we're talking about ICE, but I promise you, every state in the country has some version of this, right? We just can't cover every one. We're using Texas as an example, but I promise you, if you look up New York or you look up California or Illinois or any other state, they're going to have basic training schools, they're going to have mandatory reoccurring, and they're going to have specialized courses. Something else that doesn't get talked about is there is a whole cottage industry of retired cops who, especially if they come from specialized fields, create their own little companies. And there's one particular group, and I won't name them, who go around the country and teach managers, right? Or they'll go around and they'll teach these different little specialties. And these companies contract with an agency, and they'll come in and they'll teach 30 or 40 officers one of these classes. Now, to some extent, there's a benefit to it, right? You're not paying for room and board to send an officer somewhere to get that training. You as a chief executive are bringing that in being able to do a bunch of your officers in that training. But you'd be surprised how much tax money, and that stuff ain't cheap, When you talk about bringing one of them in, they're charging, $3, 4, $500 a seat to sit through this training. And again, there's a whole cottage industry. Just look up police training supplier on a Google search, and you'll see the different companies out there and the different things that they teach. You have a lot of them that have gone online that maybe is not as expensive, and they can do some of the more academic oriented courses. But again, your chief executive of your local law enforcement agency is paying for this. You have conferences, you have training schools. TEEX here in Texas runs multiple DWI and SWAT and forensic training. And that's another one. You're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to train a forensics officer to work crime scene, or pay one of these little cottage industries to come in and teach crime scene stuff. And all of that falls under specialized and reoccurring training. Something else that doesn't get talked about outside of criminal justice circles and police circles are the national training academies. So you have the National Academy, which takes lieutenants from state and local agencies, and I think they do some federal agents that are making manager, and they basically take them to Quantico, which is the same place the FBI does their basic training, and they put them through essentially FBI training to groom them to be middle and senior level managers. You also have the Law Enforcement Management Institute in Texas. You have the Southern Command College, which tends to be a little kind of the southeast area, where you're taking these mid-level managers and you're putting them through these some of them, like the National Academy stuff, 6 weeks long. LEMIT takes up to 2 years. It's broken in blocks, and it can take up to 2 years to complete. Where you're just teaching them how to be managers, how to run an agency. And some of National Academy's free. LEMIT, they do charge a little bit, but for the most part, the state offsets that. I don't know what the Southern Command College, if it charges anything, but we're paying for these managers to go learn how to be managers, how to basically do spreadsheets and leadership, and my personal favorite, departmental vision, a mission statement. You can go to any one of those, and you're going to write a vision, and you're going to write a mission statement. And if you think it ain't full of shit, Block 2 of LEMIT, they literally go to freaking Dallas, and I shit you not, I had one come back and tell me about the water aerobics he had to do for 3 days.
It must be part of that self-medication.
So it's wellness, officer wellness. So, all of this other training's going on. So these people at Scream, officers don't know what they're doing. They're not trained. I don't know what the freak you're talking about. I really don't. Because there's all this stuff out there that if you're in the business, you're dealing with. Even if you don't go to all of it, you know somebody that has.
Well, I think part of the problem, not to get off the subject, but I think part of the problem with these libtards saying that they need more training is because you've got these talking heads on TV, on the woke news. Plus, you have these Democrat libertards that are politicians that are saying the same exact thing. They're saying, well, we need more training, or that officer didn't have enough training, or he didn't have enough sensitivity to the situation. And again, it goes back to training. It's de-escalation, people, not sensitivity. It's de-escalation. Libtards call it sensitivity training. But I think that's part of the problem is that you've got these talking heads and these talking politicians that are the ones sitting here telling people that we need more training. So the libtards pick up on that and they spew it again. They regurgitate it. And they're like, oh, we need more training. But we just laid out in the hour that we've been here how much training these people go through in the continuous training and specialized training. So next time I hear a lib going, well, we need more training, I'm going to pull out my fact sheet. I'm going to put it on there and I'm going to say, this is what they go through. And if you don't believe me, go research it. That's what I did.
Well, and the thing is, I don't think it starts there. Where it actually starts is in the criminal justice programs at your community and 4-year universities.
Well, then maybe we need to redesign them.
Oh, we certainly need to redesign them.
Because it's not your officers. Apparently, it's the community colleges and the academies saying that we need to do this.
A lot of them are. They're doing these peer reviewed research, and they're coming in. They're telling these kids who are going to college before they're old enough to be a police officer. They're trying to get a basic knowledge. I'm a very big supporter. I think a college educated officer tends to perform better. They're easier because we talked about all that stuff you have to learn. They're already used to learning, right?
They're used to that structure.
But they're being taught by professors who've never worked in the system. Most of them are sociology PhDs. If they're and criminal justice really is just a sociology degree. It's all it is. You can spray a pile of shit with rose spray. It's still going to stink like shit. So you have these professors who work in an environment of publish or perish. So they have to make the best peer-reviewed article, and they have to constantly do this. So what do we see? We see officers need more training. They need to use less discretion. They need to use force, and you can actually go back and look at criminal justice. In the early 90s, everything was about officer discretion. All the peer-reviewed articles were about officer discretion on traffic tickets. And then you get OJ and you get the LA riots. Everything was about use of force, and all officers are racist. Then 9/11 or 9/11 happens. Now all of a sudden, everything's about domestic terrorism. So, officers are going to be the first line in terrorism. Long about 2010 and 2012, there's actually a very famous book comes out, and we start talking about cops being institutional racism. Policing itself, the institutions themselves are racist, right? So you're an 18-year-old kid, you're fresh out of college, you're sitting in front of a PhD who may have never worked, but they're going to tell you how great their CJ program, criminal justice program is. And they're going to tell you they're an expert in whatever little thing they write papers about. And then they're going to tell you about all of this crap. Well, the vast majority of those CJ students don't actually go to be police officers. Some go into teaching, some go to law schools, some may go to corrections, some may just go into business because, hey, it's a CJ program, it's not really worth a whole lot. But you've got these people, and some go on to become professors themselves. And guess what they're writing? They're writing the same crap that cops are racist, they're using force, and they need more training. The thing is, those PhDs, they get access to, they're the ones that the politicians reference their peer-reviewed articles. So guess what? Cops are racist. Again, keep in mind, these are people who've never done the job, right? They're an expert. Let me ask you something. You're going to go get legal advice? Hey, I went to law school once, but I've never actually practiced law. You're being accused of a crime, so I'm going to hire you. Are you going to hire that person, or are you going to sit down with that lawyer who's, okay, look, yeah, I've got the same law degree, right? Think bachelor's in CJ. I've got the same law degree, except I've got a few years practicing also. Which lawyer are you going to expect? But we're teaching these kids all this stuff, and we're making them read books like The New Jim Crow and, Institutional Race, The Modern Slave Catcher. We're teaching people this. And these are the people that are going out and they're regurgitating this crap that they've read in these CJ programs, thinking it's legitimate. They've never done the job.
That's our problem. Maybe we need to start with the colleges and the CJ programs and take these professors out that have never done the job and actually put retirees in there who have actually done the job for 20 or 30 years.
We absolutely do. And I promise you can find enough with graduate level degrees.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And years of experience to go in and go, hey, look, this stuff's out here, and here's an argument for this. But we also need to redesign the programs themselves because there's a lot of emphasis on the sociology side, But if you're going into, it doesn't matter whether it's community supervision, probation, parole, that type thing, corrections, working the jails and prisons, or you're doing enforcement, you're writing reports. And the only writing class you get is that one semester in freshman English that you have to have. You're dealing with people with mental. You may not have to take an abnormal psych. You can get a CJ degree and never have to take abnormal psychology. You can get a CJ degree and never have to take anything more than just whatever little science that may or may not apply. But as a cop, you're going to use all of that. You're going to use biology if you go into forensics. You're going to use chemistry if you go into forensics. You're going to use a lot of high-level math if you go into accident investigation. You're going to use, if you're just a routine patrol officer, a few semesters of abnormal psych is going to be, your entire degree is going to come down to that's what you're going to use. The effect of the criminal justice system in gender and racial studies class, you will never use in a 20-year career. I promise you that. So yeah, we do need. I think officers should be college educated. I think we should certainly put into that. But we need to change the program so that we're actually producing graduates who are prepared to go to that 700, 800 hour academy, who's prepared to go to that reoccurring training and prepared to become a specialist within their field.
Yeah. Be cops and not try to be mental officers, because there's a specialty for that.
There are mental health officers that literally that's what they
job.
do. I know the new thing now is to pair them up with social workers, and they go to mental health calls.
I think that's a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, it's very controlled. So in a lot of cases, what happens is you have a regular patrol officer. It shows up on scene. Hey, I need a mental health officer. The mental health officer shows up with their little social worker partner. Maybe they deal with the situation. Maybe they do what they call an emergency detention order. But you're taking resources from call response because that mental health officer is not running burglary calls. They're not running family violence calls, which 40%, 46%, and that's been pretty constant over the past 30 years of every police officer call is domestic in nature. Your mental health officer is not running that. They're not going to that. So yeah, it's a specialty and it has a purpose, but it's not as used as much as people think, and it's not as practical in most law enforcement situations. And you got to think you're taking a civilian social worker into a dynamic scene.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's going
to now you got to worry about, you're adding another voice and you're adding another person
already to a bad situation.
Right.
That's what I think is going to end in disaster. Is you have a civilian social worker who is in a situation with a mental health officer and a regular officer, and then you're putting them in that dynamic, and you're not focused on that social worker because you're worried about the person in front of you.
I'm saying you are focused on that social worker because God help you if that social work gets hurt.
So you're not there fully on the scene if you're having to worry about a civilian that's there for a mental health call. That's what we have clinics for. That's what we have holds for. Mental health holds for. Is just to get them there and let them deal with them. And that's in that situation that's a more controlled environment instead of where they're at when they're on that call. Because I guarantee you that officer is trained to worry about not only the suspect, but now he's got to worry about a social worker.
Well, that officer's trained to basically walk in and go, has a criminal act happened?
Right.
Right. So remember what I said about domestic violence. So you have a person having a mental health episode. They probably live with a family member. They've assaulted the family member. The officer comes in. They have a mandate they have to arrest because that's what they were trained to do in the basic academy. That's what they were trained to do in their field training program. And that's what the law says they have to do.
Right.
Right. So they're doing exactly what we as a society have told them to do.
Yeah.
That person assaulted a family member, arrest that person.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden, no. We need a social worker. Never
That
mind.
just adds to the dynamic.
Never mind that social worker. Most of them are provided by NGOs. Kind of funny that mandate happens. Wonder how much money the state's paying for that.
That's part of our problem. Is NGOs.
So you'd be surprised how many NGOs law enforcement has to deal with.
Yeah.
So, but that's a subject for another time.
That's another subject.
So, again, the next time you hear some talking head, and do this, you see it on social media, right? Some talking head gets up there. Well, if the officer only had more training, type on that little interactive page, help them out, give them a response, but ask them specifically what you would have done and what training would have made that situation better. Right? What extra 40-hour little school can we tack on to that 700 or 800 basic hours basic police academy? What other 40 hours if only by God the officer had known that.
Guys, we appreciate you joining us here on 1043 Podcast. And like, share, comment. I'm also going to put a link on our Facebook pages so that we can share it there. And we hope you enjoyed